Louisiana has a unique late fee framework shaped by its civil law legal system, derived from French and Spanish law rather than the English common law system used by the other 49 states. The governing law is found in the Louisiana Civil Code, along with specific provisions in Louisiana Revised Statutes Title IX, addressing residential leases. If you're a landlord or tenant in Louisiana, the civil law approach creates a different legal framework than what you'll find in any other state, and it affects how late fees are analyzed and enforced. Let's start with the basics. Louisiana does not have a specific statute that caps late fees at a defined dollar amount or percentage. The fee amount is governed by the lease terms and civil code principles. Under Louisiana's civil law framework, a lease is a contract, and contractual provisions, including late fee clauses, are enforceable as long as they don't violate public policy or mandatory legal provisions. However, Louisiana's civil code does impose limits through the concept of penal clauses. Clauses penal. Under Louisiana Civil Code Article 2005, a penal clause, which is what a late fee essentially is, can be modified by the court if it is so manifestly unreasonable as to be contrary to public policy. This gives Louisiana courts the authority to reduce a late fee that is grossly disproportionate to the landlord's actual damages, even if the tenant agreed to it in the lease. Louisiana does not mandate a specific grace period by statute. There is no state law requiring a defined number of days before a late fee can be charged. If your lease says rent is due on the 1st and a late fee applies on the 2nd, that's enforceable. However, standard practice among Louisiana landlords is to include a grace period of 3 to 5 days, and most professional property managers use at least a short grace period. The reasonableness standard under Louisiana's civil law framework is somewhat different from the common law liquidated damages analysis used in most states. In common law states, courts evaluate whether the fee was a reasonable pre-estimate of damages at the time the contract was formed. In Louisiana, courts evaluate whether the fee is manifestly unreasonable at the time of enforcement, which can include consideration of the actual damages that occurred. This subtle difference means Louisiana courts have broader discretion to modify a late fee based on the actual circumstances. What's reasonable in Louisiana? Industry standards suggest that a flat fee of $25 to $60 or a percentage-based fee of 5 to 10% of the monthly rent is generally defensible. Louisiana has a moderate to affordable rental market. Rents in New Orleans typically range from $1,000 to $1,800. Baton Rouge is slightly lower, and smaller communities are more affordable. The lease must clearly state the late fee terms. Under civil law principles, contractual obligations must be clearly defined and agreed upon by both parties. The lease should specify the rent due date, any grace period, the exact fee amount or formula when the fee triggers, and whether additional charges apply for continued non-payment. Ambiguous provisions under Louisiana law are interpreted against the party who drafted the contract, which is the landlord. Compounding late fees in Louisiana must satisfy the Civil Code's general principles. A single, one-time fee is the simplest and safest approach. A daily or weekly compounding structure that accumulates to a disproportionate amount faces the risk of judicial modification under Article 2005. The court's authority to reduce manifestly unreasonable penalties means that aggressive compounding structures are vulnerable. The interaction between late fees and the eviction process in Louisiana is governed by the Louisiana Code of Civil Procedure and specific eviction statutes. Louisiana's eviction process requires the landlord to provide a 5-day notice to vacate for non-payment of rent. If the tenant fails to pay or vacate within 5 days, the landlord can file an eviction suit, known as a rule for possession. The amount demanded must be accurate. Whether late fees can be included depends on how the lease defines them. If defined as additional rent, they can be included in the total amount. If not, the landlord may need to pursue the fees as a separate claim. Best practice. Define late fees as additional rent. Louisiana's eviction process through the Justice of the Peace Court or City Court is relatively fast. The combination of the 5-day notice and efficient court procedures means evictions can be completed within a few weeks. Non-compliant late fees included in the demand can create complications, particularly if the tenant retains counsel. Louisiana does not impose a specific statutory cap on security deposits. The deposit amount is governed by the lease. The deposit must be returned within 30 days with an itemized list of deductions. Unpaid late fees can be deducted if the lease authorizes it and the fees are reasonable. Failure to return the deposit within 30 days can result in the landlord being liable for penalties and damages, including up to twice the amount wrongfully withheld. For tenants receiving housing choice voucher assistance, common in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and other Louisiana cities, landlords should not charge late fees when the housing authority's portion is delayed due to processing. The tenant cannot control the authority's payment timeline. If the tenant's portion is paid on time, the fee should apply only when the tenant's own payment is actually late. Louisiana's military population is significant, centered around Fort Johnson near Leesville, Barksdale Air Force Base near Bossier City, Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base New Orleans, and the Naval Construction Battalion Center in Gulfport, Mississippi, which draws Louisiana residents. Fort Johnson, formerly Fort Polk, is one of the Army's primary training centers for combat operations. Barksdale AFB is home to the 2nd Bomb Wing and Air Force Global Strike Command. Military pay is predictable, and most military tenants pay reliably. Fort Johnson's training mission produces constant rotation. New military tenants arrive regularly and may need a pay cycle to establish direct deposit. Some Leesville and DeRidder landlords accommodate first-month timing while establishing clear expectations going forward. Barksdale's more stable permanent party population in the Bossier City-Shreveport area provides reliable tenants. Louisiana's hurricane vulnerability creates critical considerations for late fee enforcement. The state experiences major hurricane impacts regularly, and the aftermath of a major storm can disrupt the rental market for months. Tenants may be displaced, lose employment, face property damage, or experience infrastructure failures that prevent normal financial transactions. During and after a declared disaster, aggressive late fee enforcement is both legally risky and practically unproductive. Some landlords voluntarily suspend late fees during disaster periods. Federal disaster declarations may trigger additional protections that affect the landlord-tenant relationship. Landlords in hurricane-prone areas, which is essentially all of southern Louisiana, should have a disaster contingency plan that addresses late fees. The oil and gas industry heavily influences Louisiana's economy, and late payment patterns in energy-dependent communities can correlate with commodity price cycles. When oil prices are strong, energy workers are employed and pay reliably. When prices drop, layoffs and reduced hours can lead to increased late payments. Landlords in communities dependent on the energy sector, including much of South Louisiana, the Houma-Thibodaux corridor, and Lake Charles, should calibrate their expectations to market conditions. From a practical standpoint, Louisiana's rental market has several distinct regions with different late fee dynamics. New Orleans is the state's largest and most complex rental market. The economy is driven by tourism, healthcare, including the major medical complexes along Canal Street and in the medical district, the Port of New Orleans, energy services, higher education, and the cultural economy. Rents in desirable New Orleans neighborhoods, the French Quarter, Garden District, Uptown, Marigny, Bywater, commonly range from $1,200 to $2,200. New Orleans has a significant short-term rental market driven by Airbnb and tourism. The interaction between short-term and long-term rental markets affects pricing and availability. Late fee enforcement in the long-term market follows standard practices. Most New Orleans landlords charge flat fees with grace periods. The hospitality workforce, hotels, restaurants, bars, entertainment venues, represents a large portion of New Orleans' tenant population. These workers often have income that fluctuates based on tourist volume, convention schedules, and seasonal patterns. Mardi Gras season and Jazz Fest produce strong income. Slow summer months can produce reduced income. Late payment patterns among hospitality workers may follow these cycles. Baton Rouge, the state capital and home to LSU, has a diverse market driven by state government, petrochemical industry, healthcare, and the university. Student tenants near LSU may experience late payments at the beginning of each semester when financial aid processes. The state government workforce pays reliably. Shreveport-Bossier City has a market influenced by Barksdale AFB, healthcare, and gaming. Military tenants provide reliable demand. The gaming industry employs a workforce with fluctuating income. Lafayette is the heart of Louisiana's Cajun country and a center for the oil and gas services industry. Late payment patterns in Lafayette correlate with energy market conditions. Lake Charles has experienced growth from LNG export facilities and industrial development, but also hurricane damage that has affected the rental market. Monroe, Alexandria, and smaller Louisiana communities have more affordable markets. One best practice for Louisiana landlords: draft your late fee provision clearly and specifically. Under civil law principles, ambiguity works against the drafter. State the exact fee, the grace period, the trigger conditions, and whether the fee is additional rent. A clear provision is more enforceable than a vague one, and Louisiana courts have broad authority to modify unclear terms. Another best practice? Set your late fee at a level that can survive judicial review under Article 2005. A fee of 5 to 8% of the monthly rent is defensible. A fee that significantly exceeds your documented actual costs is vulnerable to judicial reduction, regardless of what the tenant agreed to in the lease. Louisiana courts can and do modify manifestly unreasonable penalties. A third best practice: have a hurricane plan. If you own rental property in Louisiana, hurricanes are not a hypothetical. They're a certainty over time. Your plan should include a documented policy for temporarily suspending late fees during declared emergencies, procedures for communicating with tenants about payment expectations during and after a storm, and flexibility to work with tenants whose finances are disrupted by the disaster. A landlord who enforces late fees against a tenant displaced by a Category 4 hurricane generates negative attention, not revenue. For the complete guide to Louisiana late fee laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our late fee law series.